Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to give you that shortcut to being genuinely well informed, without getting lost in all the noise out there. We know you want to cut straight to what matters. And today, we're doing just that. We're taking a deep dive into something that, okay, maybe sounds a bit corporate speak at first, the COSO Enterprise Risk Management Framework, ERM. But honestly, this isn't about dry compliance stuff. It's really about building organizational strength in a world that, well, keeps throwing curveballs. We're looking specifically at the 2017 update today. I think of it more like a really smart GPS for navigating today's business world, which is just incredibly complex. It's a roadmap for more than just survival. It's about thriving, about creating real value.
And that value creation point, that's exactly why this is so vital right now. It's really striking how interconnected everything is now. The framework talks about four objective categories: strategic, operations, reporting, and compliance. But they're not just linked anymore. They feel almost fused. I mean, think about it. You've got AI-driven cyber threats constantly ramping up. Geopolitical instability is pretty much the norm, and things like non-financial reporting. That's not just optional anymore. It's becoming mandatory in many places. So moving from that old way, managing risk in separate boxes, to a holistic view, a portfolio view. It's not just best practice. Honestly, it feels more like a prerequisite for survival these days.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. You mentioned the framework is about integrating with strategy and performance. What does that actually look like for a company, and why was this 2017 update such a big deal for creating value?
Right, so the 2017 update, its full title is actually Enterprise Risk Management Integrating with Strategy and Performance. It fundamentally shifted how we think about ERM. It took it from being maybe a reactive thing, focused on controls, almost like hitting the brakes, to being a really proactive, integrated discipline, something central to strategy and how a company actually performs. The core idea is pretty straightforward, really. Every organization exists to provide value for its stakeholders. Simple enough. But obviously, every organization faces risks trying to do that. So the framework helps you spot events that might mess with your objectives, manage those risks within your appetite, and then ultimately create, preserve, and realize value. It's about seeing risk as, well, part of the strategic conversation, not just a downside to be avoided.
That really clarifies it. Now, something that often trips people up, and I hear this a lot, is the difference between the COSO ERM framework and the COSO internal control framework, the IC framework. They can seem quite similar on the surface. How do you explain the distinction?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's super common. People definitely get tangled up there. So the internal control framework, the one updated in 2013, that's mainly focused on, well, internal controls. Its job is to give reasonable assurance that objectives around operations, reporting, and compliance are being met. It's basically the go-to standard for SOX 404, specifically for controls over external financial reporting. Think of it as the how, the detailed controls, the policies, those 17 principles that make sure things work right. The ERM framework, though, it's much broader. It's the big picture, the strategic tool for managing all kinds of business risks, all in pursuit of creating value. ERM defines what are the risks we face? What are our strategic goals? So it's not an either situation. Good governance really comes from aligning them, integrating them. ERM gives you the strategic lens, right? And IC provides the specific tools, the mechanisms for mitigation. They work together, like having the playbook and the rulebook.
Playbook and rulebook. I like that analogy. Okay, so with that foundation clear, let's dive into those four ERM objective categories you mentioned: strategic, operations, reporting, compliance. You said earlier the lines are getting blurred because of new risks and tech. How does that play out first with strategic objectives?
Absolutely. For strategic objectives, ERM is all about making sure your risk management lines up with the organization's big long-term goals, its ability to create and keep value. And if you look ahead, say to 2035, the top long-term strategic worries are pretty clear. Heightened regulatory changes are huge. And the sheer speed of disruptive innovation, particularly AI and other emerging tech, that's massive. Plus, geopolitical tensions, especially this global competition around AI, countries vying for tech dominance, even things like corporate espionage. These are major strategic risks. And the tricky part, the nuance, is this patchwork of regulations globally. The U.S. might lean towards a lighter touch to spur innovation, while, say, the EU imposes stricter rules. That creates a really complex map for global companies trying to follow one strategy.
Yeah, you can see how those strategic issues would definitely ripple outwards into operations objectives. Operational risks aren't just contained incidents anymore, are they? They seem to have these domino effects. We actually saw an interesting case study, I think it was in Brazil, in the auto and electronics sectors. A lack of communication, poor visibility, unclear roles. It left businesses wide open to supply chain problems that could just grind everything to a halt. So, how are companies dealing with that kind of vulnerability now? What's the modern fix for stopping those operational cascades?
That Brazil example is spot on. It shows exactly the problem. The modern approach. It heavily involves continuous monitoring tools. These tools are built to spot disruptions early. Things like a key supplier suddenly shutting down, or a fire at a plant, or even just significant shipping delays. The goal is to detect these before they snowball into major operational headaches. So you're shifting from reacting after the fact to actually anticipating the problem. And that proactive stance, it doesn't just cut costs, which it definitely does, but it also protects customer trust, protects the brand reputation. Those things are incredibly difficult to earn back if you lose them. It's about weaving resilience right into your day-to-day operations.
Getting ahead of the curve, essentially. Okay, let's talk reporting objectives. This feels like an area that's undergone a massive transformation. It's way beyond just the financials now, right?
Oh, absolutely. Monumental is the right word. Reporting has evolved so much. It's moved toward this broader integrated model that now actually mandates non-financial information. We're seeing new rules pop up, EU, US, UK, requiring companies to publish their ESG performance, environmental, social, governance, right alongside the financials. It's not just a nice to have for PR anymore. For many, it's compulsory. And driving this is this concept of double materiality. It's a core part of frameworks like the EU's CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Double materiality means you report on two things. First, how do ESG issues hit your bottom line? That's financial materiality. And second, how do your operations impact society and the environment? That's impact materiality. The big takeaway. Companies can't just focus on profit anymore. They have to account for their wider impact on people, on the planet, with the same seriousness as their balance sheet. It's a fundamental shift in corporate responsibility. Real teeth, real consequences. We're even seeing the US SEC push for climate risk integration based on the TCFD framework.
Wow, that's a significant change in accountability. Okay, so with all this going on, how are compliance objectives keeping pace? Are regulators changing how they oversee things, making it more risk-based, more agile?
That's a really crucial question. And yes, there are big changes. A key example is the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board in the U.S. They've brought in a new quality control standard, QC1000. It takes effect late 2025. This basically scraps the old sort of rule-based checklist approach and replaces it with a genuinely risk-based system. It forces auditing firms to proactively figure out their specific quality risks and then design controls tailored to those risks. It's a huge philosophical shift. It's moving away from just ticking boxes to actively managing the inherent risks in doing quality work. Plus, there are new rules about transparency. Firms have to publicly report metrics like how involved partners are, workloads, training hours. So this new regulatory mindset, it puts external pressure on companies, basically reinforcing ERM principles from the outside in. Regulators are demanding this dynamic, risk-based approach. It pushes organizations away from static compliance checklists towards a living, breathing ERM program that constantly learns and improves. Compliance becomes a strategic imperative.
It definitely sounds like these categories are much more tangled than they used to be, not separate islands at all. So if everything's so interconnected, how do organizations even start to get their arms around risk without just being completely overwhelmed? Is there like a core principle in ERM for pulling it all together?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a really central concept in the framework, the portfolio view. It's not just a nice idea. It actually mirrors modern portfolio theory, MPT, from the finance world. You know how MPT says you don't look at an asset's risk in isolation? You look at how it fits into the whole portfolio's risk and return. Well, ERM applies that same logic to business risks. It demands an aggregated, holistic view of all risks together. It means really understanding how different risks are connected, how they correlate. For instance, think about it. A geopolitical event, that's a strategic risk, right? But it could easily disrupt your supply chain that's operational. And maybe that disruption creates a weakness, a security gap, leading to a data breach. Now you're into cyber risk. Seeing those connections, those potential cascades, allows a company to, in a way, diversify its risk approach. You can implement controls that tackle a whole cluster of linked risks at once. This helps optimize the overall risk-return balance and makes the organization much more resilient. It really elevates ERM. It's not just risk avoidance. It's a sophisticated way to optimize value, seeing the whole forest, not just the trees.
That portfolio analogy really clicks. Okay, so thinking about this interconnected landscape, what are the actual risks that are keeping executives awake at night? What does the data show us, both now and looking ahead? We looked at some recent surveys, like that NC State Protivity one that polls C-suite execs. It gives a pretty clear picture. In the near term, say the next couple of years, 2025 to 2027, the big worries are things like macroeconomic volatility, inflation, labor costs, that sort of thing. Cyber threats and data breaches are right up there too, no surprise there. And talent issues, finding people, keeping them, succession planning, that's a major headache. But then if you look further out towards 2035, the focus shifts. Long term, it's heavily concentrated on increased regulation, the sheer speed of disruptive tech, especially AI, and cyber threats are still a top concern.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating about that data is how it perfectly illustrates this blurring of lines we've been talking about, especially between strategic and operational risk. Historically, maybe you could separate them more easily, but today's big risks, they just don't fit neatly into those old categories. Take AI, for instance. If your company fails to adopt AI effectively and falls behind competitors, that feels like a classic strategic risk. But what about a flawed AI implementation, one that's biased or makes inaccurate decisions? That's clearly an operational risk, right? Could cause huge reputational damage. And then you have AI-powered cyber attacks, really sophisticated social engineering deepfakes being used in scams. That's both strategic and operational. It can cause massive financial loss and destroy trust. These kinds of blended risks, they demand that holistic, integrated approach we discussed, the old siloed view. It's just obsolete. It doesn't work anymore.
Okay, so if the risks themselves are becoming so complex, so systemic, it stands to reason that the old ways of assessing risk probably aren't enough either. How are organizations actually evaluating these complex risks now? What tools are they using? Has the toolkit evolved?
You're absolutely right. It's moved way beyond just subjective judgment or simple heat maps, although those still have a place. Today's toolkit is much more sophisticated. It usually includes a mix of qualitative, quantitative, and semi-quantitative methods. Qualitative is still useful, using expert opinion for ratings like low, medium, high. It's quick, good for initial scans, especially for risks that are tough to put a number on. But then you have quantitative methods. These are data-driven. They use actual numbers, often financial values, and statistical techniques like Monte Carlo analysis to really model risk severity and likelihood. They give you much more precise forecasts. And semi-quantitative kind of bridges the gap. It might use a numeric scale, but link it to descriptive categories. It adds some objectivity to qualitative data without needing the heavy data inputs of purely quantitative methods. But for those really thorny, complex, systemic risks, the ones that keep execs up at night, organizations are turning to more advanced techniques too. Monte Carlo simulation, for example. It's very data intensive. You run thousands, even millions of simulations using random variables to map out the probabilities of different outcomes and their potential financial impact. It allows for really rigorous decision-making. And then there's scenario analysis and stress testing. This is where you basically game out hypothetical futures. What if there's another global pandemic, a massive natural disaster, a sudden geopolitical crisis? You model these extreme but plausible events to see how the organization would hold up. These are absolutely critical now, especially for things like climate-related risks, where the future is so uncertain.
It definitely sounds like a much more advanced toolkit. So, okay, we've talked about the framework, the risks, the assessment methods. How does it all come together in practice? You mentioned governance, culture, and technology creating the synergy. Can you elaborate on how those forces combine to make ERM work effectively?
Right? Synergy is the perfect word. It's how these pieces connect. Let's start with governance and culture. A huge shift has happened with the role of the Chief Risk Officer, the CRO. They're moving beyond being just the traditional risk mitigator. They're becoming a strategic partner. Sometimes people even call them the Chief Alignment Officer, someone who uses risk insights and data not just to prevent bad things, but actually to drive business growth, to unify different parts of the organization. It reframes risk as an opportunity, you see. And supporting this is that governance structure, often the three lines model. It provides clarity. You have the first line, operational managers, the people who own and manage risks day to day. The second line, risk management and compliance functions. They set the policies, do assessments, provide oversight. And the third line, internal audit, giving independent assurance to the board and senior management. The crucial thing is this model works best when those lines aren't silos. They need to collaborate, communicate openly, and underpinning all of that is fostering a risk-aware culture. That's top-down and bottom-up. It means embedding risk thinking into everyday jobs through training, communication, the soft stuff, but also through clear policies, defined roles, performance metrics, the hard stuff. The goal is for everyone, every employee, to feel empowered to spot and report risk proactively.
Okay, so the people, the structure, the culture, that's the human foundation. Where does technology really plug in and supercharge this? I'm guessing GRC software, for example, isn't just a database anymore. How has it evolved into a more strategic tool?
Exactly. Technology is the accelerator, the engine. And yes, GRC governance, risk, and compliance software has changed dramatically. It used to be more like a digital filing cabinet, right? An activity-centric repository. Now, modern GRC platforms are strategic. They focus on outcomes. They use sophisticated metrics like mitigation velocity, how fast are we fixing high-priority risks, or control maturity scoring, how effective are our controls, really. These platforms pull together risk data from all over the place, they automate workflows, and they create that crucial single source of truth for the organization's entire risk profile. This frees up the risk teams from just compiling data manually to actually analyzing it strategically. And building on that foundation is continuous monitoring, or CM. This is huge. CM means systematically tracking risks pretty much constantly, in real time or near real time. It moves away from those static periodic assessments. It's heavily powered by automation, which reduces human error, makes compliance stronger, and crucially lets you spot and respond to new risks or control failures almost immediately.
And then, of course, there's AI. You mentioned it as a risk itself, but how does it act as a force multiplier for ERM on the positive side?
AI, yes, it's definitely a force multiplier. AI-driven predictive analytics are a game changer. They can sift through massive amounts of data, structured, unstructured, internal, external, way faster than humans can, identifying patterns and potential risk before they actually blow up. This lets organizations become truly proactive, not just reactive. AI can also power dynamic key risk indicators, KRIs. Think of them as an intelligent early warning system. They monitor live beta feeds and adjust automatically as risk exposures change. But, as we touched on, there's that dual edge. AI is incredibly powerful, but it also introduces brand new, complex risks. We talked about AI-driven cyber attacks, like highly convincing phishing or deepfake scams. Plus, the AI models themselves can be vulnerable. If their training data is manipulated or poisoned, they can produce biased or even malicious results. So organizations absolutely need to embrace AI for risk management, but they also have to be really rigorous about AI model risk management, understanding and mitigating the risks inherent in the AI itself. It's a balancing act.
That really highlights the complexity. So the final piece seems to be getting all this insight to the right people effectively. How has information, communication, and reporting changed to support this dynamic ERM system?
This is absolutely critical. All the great analysis is useless if it doesn't drive better decisions. The big shift here is away from those thick, static, backward-looking reports that maybe get produced quarterly or annually. We're moving towards dynamic, often real-time dashboards. These give stakeholders from the board down to operational managers a clear, single view of the current risk landscape. Good dashboards will show real-time KRIs, maybe visual risk heat maps, and crucially, the ability to drill down into specific risks, see their status, see what mitigation actions are underway. GRC platforms often automate a lot of this reporting, which again frees people up for analysis, not just number crunching. This constant flow of relevant information going up to leadership, down to the front lines, and across different departments, that's what makes modern ERM a truly dynamic living system. It ensures everyone's working with the same information, supporting those strategic goals proactively.
So wrapping this all up, it feels like the key message is that the COSO ERM framework isn't just this static document anymore. It's really a blueprint for building a living, breathing system within an organization, a system that adapts, anticipates, uses technology smartly, fosters the right culture, gets the governance right, and moves way beyond just checking compliance boxes to actually creating tangible value and making the organization more resilient.
Precisely. And for you, our listener, really grasping this evolution is key. It takes you beyond just knowing about risk categories. It helps you understand how to strategically use this integrated approach to risk, how to harness it. And that understanding is fundamental for building resilience and gaining a real competitive edge in today's world, which, as we've said, is just constantly changing. So maybe a final thought to leave you with building on all this. Considering that dual nature of AI, we discussed how it's both an incredibly powerful tool for risk management, but also a source of significant new risks. What steps could you or your organization start thinking about to really harness AI's benefits while also proactively managing those unique risks it brings? Maybe going even beyond some of the things we touched on today.